Hi everyone, welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. Today I'm going to return to the year-long series I'm doing on the films of Luis Bunuel. But before that, I'm responding to a request from one of my subscribers who would like me to mention some of the film-related books that I've been reading. Now, in the last few months, I've had several eye surgeries, and now I'm comfortably able to read books from the library. And a lot of movie books are very expensive, and so it's advantageous to me to get books out of the library. Now I can read them. And I recently purchased in the Barnes & Noble Criterion sale, I recently purchased the Dietrich Sternberg in Hollywood box set. So I thought I might read John Baxter's biography of Joseph von Sternberg. I think it's the only biography of Sternberg in English. And Baxter also wrote a biography of Luis Bunuel, which I read about a month ago. His biographies are very easy to read. They're well researched, entertaining. He does dwell a lot on gossip. There's in von Sternberg and Dietrich's life. There's a lot of gossip to talk about, especially Dietrich's prodigious sex life. And Baxter, you get all that. He's not very. It doesn't go into much depth on the films themselves, but I did enjoy this book. And there's a couple other von Sternberg related books that I will be getting soon. And then just this morning, I finished this book, Here to Cinema, the 1950s Neo-Realism Hollywood New Wave. And these are translations of reviews by some of the most famous New Wave directors in France in the 1950s before they became directors. So we have Francois Truffaut, and we have Jacques Rivette, and Eric Rohmer, and Claude Chabrol, and who else? And we get a good bit of Andre Bazin. He was probably the godfather, sort of the New Wave, and probably the best critic in movie history, perhaps. This was a very polemical time in film history. The French New Wave directors were extolling American cinema, so there's lots of American cinema reviews here. They're very, some of their opinions are very hyperbolic. For instance, Jacques Rivette, who is a big fan of Howard Hawks, is reviewing Monkey Business, early 50s comedy by Hawks, and he says, you only have to see Monkey Business to realize what a masterpiece it is. Now, I'm a fan of Howard Hawks' comedies. I would say Monkey Business is not at the top of the list. And then there's similar Nicholas Ray too is so anointed as one of the greatest artists in almost human history. Rivette's kind of hard to understand a lot. He's very dense and not always very clear. But he does there's a big article on Journey to Italy by Roberto Rossellini in this collection, a movie I've never liked. And so I thought I'd see it again, which I did, and to me the ending always seemed to be kind of absurd. It stars one of Rossellini's Ingrid Bergman films. And then the next day I read Eric Rohmer's review of Journey to Italy, and Rohmer is very crystal clear. He thinks it's great, and for the first time I really saw the connection between Eric Rohmer's films, which I love, to Roberto Rossellini. They were both Catholics. They both believed in a miraculous dimension to life. So this ending in Journey to Italy can be seen as a miracle, as unlikely as it seems when you're watching the film. But this sort of Rossellini's sort of documentary approach to watching people and developing character, something that Romer really did. And it's stated often in this collection that all the New Wave directors were in love with Hollywood cinema. They knew that when they became filmmakers, they wouldn't be able to make Hollywood-type films, and also their biggest inclination was towards what is called today the European art film, and they especially loved Rossellini. There's not much mention of Bunuel, except at the back of the book there are the consensus top movies of the year, the consensus of the Cahiers critics, and some other people as well, some other critics that didn't write for the Cahiers de Cinema. And Los Olvidados finished about fifth in the 1952 poll, and The Criminal Life of Archibaldo de la Cruz similarly in the 56 poll. But no mention of Bunuel other than that, which I was kind of disappointed with. Well, let's get to the Bunuel film that I want to talk about a little bit today, and that's El Bruto. This is from 1952. As you can tell by the cover, this is a melodrama. And this is serious melodrama from the beginning to the end. And it's Bunuel often dismissed. He often talked as if he were ashamed about most of the films he made in Mexico. El Bruto being one of those, because he said the original conception he had for the film, he had to change all around due to what the producers wanted. So he was disappointed with this one. And you might wonder through this period of Mexico, why did Bunuel persevere so in making films that he really, at least years later, you would say he didn't really have his heart in it. And well, he needed, for one thing, he found a home in Mexico in the late 40s. His career from the early 30s to late 40s was just a series, both in France and the U.S., in trying to establish himself as a filmmaker, as a filmmaker who, as somebody who could have a career in filmmaking. So when he went to Mexico in the late 40s, a burgeoning, thriving industry, there was opportunity. So he needed to support his family. So these were the films that were popular, melodramas and silly comedies and musicals, neither of which Bunuel was interested in. So it had to be melodrama. And El Bruto is played by Pedro Armendariz, and beautifully played, I think. He is El Bruto. His name is Pedro, but he works in a slaughterhouse, and he is considered to be the strongest, and you don't want to mess with him. Although they tease him a lot, he rebels in his masculinity, even though he's a little bit simple-minded, and he realizes that. So he's in this job in the slaughterhouse due to sort of his patron, and this is Cabrera, an older man who has, for some reason, taken Pedro, El Bruto, under his wing, gotten him this job. Now, in the opening scene of the film, we see Cabrera, who owns a butcher shop, as well as he's a sort of a real estate investor. He comes to apartment in a courtyard of a working class apartment, and he has an eviction notice. He needs to sell this. He needs to sell this apartment. He needs money, and he has to sell this apartment to raise the money that he needs. But he comes along with lawyers and the law, and he treats the objections of his tenants with great disdain. They're all a bunch of lazy louts. The tenants begin to rebel, and they threaten that they're going to go to the courts as well. And that's something that Cabrera does not want, because he needs this money quick. And once it goes into litigation, it could take forever. So in order to squelch this revolt of the tenants, Cabrera takes Pedro El Bruto out of the slaughterhouse and brings him into his store to work in the store and to live in the back room of the store. But in payment, Pedro is going to have to terrorize the leaders of this revolting tenant group, which he does, and he inadvertently, one of the men he's terrorizing dies, who has been sickly. Cabrera is married to this very hot-blooded young woman played by Katy, Jurado, and once she realizes she's much younger and she doesn't seem to fancy her husband too much, but once she learns about El Bruto's terrorizing escapades, her hot blood is awakened, and one thing leads to another, as they say. So, and in this, Pedro wonders, why is Cabrera so interested in him? Why does he call on him and get him jobs, etc.? And he said, well, he says to himself, or actually saying it to Katy Jurado, they thought maybe he was my father, and but wouldn't he have told me if he was my father? This plays this sort of Greek tragic element. It plays into the finality of this film. Now, Pedro Armendariz, I talked about a couple weeks ago when I reviewed Fort Apache, because Pedro Armendariz was in a lot of American films, and he was in Fort Apache. He is the cavalry sergeant who goes with John Wayne when he meets Cochise, and he's really excellent in that. In fact, in those scenes with Cochise, because he has to translate back and forth. And Armendariz was also in Genghis Khan, the ill-fated John Wayne movie, where so many of the actors, technicians, got cancer, and Armendariz as well. In fact, committed suicide when he was given a terminal. When he was told his cancer was terminal. And Katy Jurado in many American movies as well, including a film that I also talked about a few months ago, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, where she plays Slim Pickens' wife, and especially memorable in Slim Pickens' famous death scene in Pat Garrett. So, and then El Bruto finds a good girl, actually the daughter of the man he is inadvertently killed. She doesn't know that. So we have the good girl, bad girl, jealousy, and one can imagine that Bunuel, the story at least, is stirring the pot, and we're going to get a very powerful melodramatic ending at the end of the film. And there are Bunuel touches here, especially the social commentary in particular, and how the working classes are so under the thumb of the bourgeoisie, and whenever they want to just end their years-long tendency, they're gone. And in the bourgeoisie, even using a working class man to do their dirty deeds. Some other little touches, Cabrera's father is alive, and he's a hunchback old man desiring candy, and whenever he gets a chance, he'll stealthily go to the cabinet to get his candy. A little bit of comedy there, and the scenes themselves, I found this compelling from beginning to end. Now, granted, I'm a big fan of melodrama, but this is a beautifully directed film. As I said, Bunuel didn't like the film. In Francisco Aranda's biography of Bunuel, which I've just started reading, the Japanese film critic Ado Kiru, who is, I think he wrote a book on Bunuel in Japanese, but he thinks that El Bruto is a sublime melodrama, and praises it to the hills. And it's really not so much a surprise, because I actually saw most of these movies, including El Bruto, about 50, 60 years ago, and liking them then. But it's nevertheless a kind of revelation. These are films of, certainly films of a major film director. And even though this is in Blu-ray, some of the other Bunuel films have been overlooked, and maybe someday we'll get a full box set of these Mexican films, and hopefully they can become even more appreciated. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who listened. Comments are welcome. Take care.